Find something that you enjoy doing and enjoy doing it at the time.
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner Sharon Sutton.
My guest this week is Chris Quine, who is the former Sports Performance Coordinator at Isle of Man Sport Aid and started working for Isle of Man Sport in January 2004. Prior to that, he worked for Zurich International, formerly Eagle Star, for 10 years. Isle of Man Sport provides the island's high-performance athletes with the support, training and facilities necessary to realise their full potential. In 2009, they opened a purpose-built facility, the Isle of Man Sport Institute, at the National Sports Centre. As well as being a big part of this development, Chris's role has given him the opportunity and privilege to work with many of the best sportsmen and women that the Isle of Man has produced, through to world and Olympic champions. During this period, athletes from the Isle of Man have excelled at national and international level and are constantly being quoted as punching above our weight. Chris oversaw the launch of the Isle of Man Sports Aid Academy, an innovative educational programme for around 60 athletes from 12 sports, which is supported with private sector funding. Here's this week's conversation with Chris Quine in episode 55 of Island Influencers. Good morning, Chris, and thanks so much for coming on Island Influencers, so fresh into your latest career of retirement, which I can't imagine is going to last very long. But for the benefit of our listeners tuning in today, tell us all about yourself. Where have you come from?
Yeah, well, I'm Manx born and bred. Went to the island schools. My career has been fairly varied, a combination of public sector and private sector. My educational background is that I went to a number of the local schools in Douglas. Started off at Tyndall Street Infants, went to Domain Road School for Boys, which was one of the last all-boys schools in the UK at the time. Graduated into Fairfield, Ballacameen, and then Douglas High School. I left school when I was 16.
Yeah.
I'd done my O-levels. I had no interest in higher education at that time.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? Yeah. Okay.
I think probably, kind of looking back, I didn't really have the confidence or belief in myself that I could operate at that level. So I got a job in the civil service, which was good at the time.
Good safe option.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, we didn't have all the career options perhaps that people have got today.
No.
We didn't have an e-gaming industry, didn't have a finance industry.
No, we didn't, did we?
So people tended to end up working in civil service, banks, those types of jobs, if that was your direction, I guess, or people go into a trade.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be for me. So yeah, I should say a safe option to go into the civil service, and I stayed there for 9 years. Yeah,
you did a pretty interesting role. Like I've read, you were in the internal audit department at the Treasury. What was that like?
That was a real eye opener. I passed the. So for those who don't know, that's kind of the way the civil service works. You came in as a clerical officer, which I think are now known as administrative officers, and there was an executive officer exam to sit, and you couldn't get promoted till you'd passed that. So I passed that when I was, 2021. It was like a bit of an IQ test. So some people would get stuck at that. They couldn't pass. But I was lucky I got in. I passed that at the second attempt. And I was lucky I applied for a job. It's in job and internal audit, came up in the Treasury, which I applied for, and I was, I think it was the first interview I'd had for an executive officer job. And I was lucky to be given that. And that was a real interesting job because you get to see everything that goes on in government.
Yeah.
I think it was described as the eyes and the ears of government. So some, get out of the office quite a lot doing, around the museums and the transport systems and things like that. So it gave you a real good insight as to kind of the broader role of government.
Yeah.
Whereas previously I'd worked in the Department of Education, which was obviously very focused on education, the schools and Isle of Man College and things like that. So I did that for 3.5 years. And again, it was enjoyable. But I think at that point I started to get a few sort of doubts that probably wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And it got me early to mid-20s and 40 odd years of this isn't what I really want to do.
No. So were you doing a lot of sport at that point as well? Because I know you from an early year. I mean, that's how I know you is from through athletics.
Yeah.
So were you doing a lot of training and stuff how supportive was it to be able to do your training and have a job?
Yeah, I started doing sport at school, which I suppose is where most people get involved. And like my dad was really keen on sport. He'd done sport at a younger age, and we, I played football, played cricket, played rugby at school. We do quite a lot of sport, I guess, outside of that, like with my brothers and things like that. Just kind of growing up, you go out for a picnic and you take a ball with you and just have a kick around or a game of cricket or whatever, all very informal. Less organised sport, I guess, for young people at that stage. But I got involved in athletics when I was about 10 or 11.
Who got you into that, your dad?
Probably a bit through my dad, through myself, that it was just something I was interested in doing.
Did you win a race at school then or something?
Yeah, you'd have the school sports and do quite well in that at school. Yeah, you'd have kind of egg and spoon race and sack race and things like that, and you'd have the 50-metre sprint. I think that's the 1 lap marathon and things like that, running at the bowl and the Eastern District Sports, and just something that I enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
I went along to Manx Athletics Club as it was then. It was at Ballacameen.
Yeah, I remember.
1 night a week.
Yeah.
One of the coldest spots on the island, I think. It was just something that I enjoyed, and then we got involved with cross country. Came along in the winter. That would be once a month, and there was stuff down at Ramsey more frequent than that Mike Bolton was organising, and that kind of morphed, I think, into Northern AC.
Yeah, it did.
Kind of fast forwarding, I guess, a little bit, so I had to go at most of that, and then in kind of mid to late teens, I was quite small for my age, so probably a bit of a late developer, and then in my probably mid-teens, I started getting a bit of improvement, which was obviously encouraging. And in 1982, we're going back nearly 4 years ago, aren't we? I was Fell Runner of the Year.
Yeah, you were a young fellow, weren't you?
I was really young. I just got kind of stuck into that. Really enjoyed getting out into the
so you'd left school at that point and you'd gone to work for you were.
Yeah, I'd be working in the Department of Education and you'd train in the evening and at the weekends.
Right.
But none of that, and throughout all the time running, I never considered it a hardship. Most people would consider it. You'd come home from work at 5:30, get your gear on and go out training, or have your tea and then go out after tea or whatever, and then that would be what you do at the weekends. Maybe Saturday morning. Yeah, you just love it. So you didn't consider it a hardship.
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby. Yeah, it's what you did.
Yeah.
And I was again fortunate, and chance and luck plays a big part in life, doesn't it? So in the 18, and then taking advantage of those opportunities is the key thing.
Do you think it's luck, or do you think it's basically you enjoy what you do, so everybody else sees it as lucky, but you've put a lot of effort in and practiced and trained hard and
well, absolutely, yeah. Well, when you say when you're enjoying it, it's not hardship. It's not.
Yeah, exactly.
People maybe studying for exams or something like that's quite hard, isn't it? Because you're doing it because you probably have to do it to progress. Yeah. But in sport, you're doing it because you love doing it.
Yes.
And the minute that you stop enjoying it, stop. I've always said that. So I was introduced to a gentleman, Maurice Herriot, who lived in Port St Mary at the time. He lives in Port Erin now. And Maurice had been one of the top runners in the world.
Yeah, Commonwealth Games, wasn't he?
He was Olympic silver medalist.
Olympic silver medalist. Oh, I do apologise. Oh, my goodness.
And European medalist as well. And he was British champion numerous times. And I don't think most people in the island are probably aware that he lives here. And certainly a lot of the people in sport didn't have this awareness that this chap lived on the island and had all this knowledge.
So how did you find him?
I was introduced to him through the Manx Athletics Club at the time.
Right.
Dave Horn, he was the chairman of Manx Athletics Club at the time, and his son Andrew, who you may recall, he was a good runner. Andrew involved with golf now.
Yes, I know Andrew.
So his late dad, Dave, was got Maurice involved. He knew Maurice, done a bit of work with Andrew, and introduced him to myself and a number of others who were involved, and we all kind of immediately hit it off. And Maurice, so I'm a young lad of 18, 19, and this guy has been second in the Olympics.
Yeah.
You're going to think he's God. really,
Yeah.
and everything he does.
Well, he kind of is, yeah.
And he is really. His knowledge and what he's achieved way beyond what anything that you would even dream of achieving. And just for someone like that to even be giving up their time to help you. Yeah, we had a few hiccups, I guess, early on as we kind of adjusted to the training that Morris was setting, and it did take a few months. And then you kind of go backwards to go forwards, don't you, really, sometimes? And then I got, again, significant improvement and, just felt so motivated to do what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But, I was doing a day job, working in the civil service, and then, say, just training in the evenings and the weekend, and saving your money to go across to compete and just try and better yourself.
Yeah, and that would have been like the time that I suppose Co and Overt and Cram were running, weren't they? So would that be a big motivation too?
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, athletics and middle distance running, which we haven't really said that, but I was trying to concentrate on, I guess, I graduated to run 1,500 metres, really. Yeah. Which was what Overt and Co and Cram were their specialist distances.
Yeah, you were pretty good. You were pretty fast, from what I remember.
Well, it was all right, I guess, by kind of local standards, and ended up breaking Ironman records and things like that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So again, I guess in anything, if you get better at it, that motivates you to want to do more. And I can remember you'd sort of sit at your desk and you're just so excited about to go training that night, because you just know it's going to be hard, but it's going to help me to improve and get that record. Better.
So where did you set your record?
In Manchester.
Okay, so you were going away back then to...
So I was going away.
Yeah, so a tartan track, proper
we
track.
only had grass tracks on Ireland,
yes.
So it was quite a big thing to go and train, I should say, on a
lot faster, yeah.
Yeah, you'd probably be second a lap type of things would be the kind of ballpark. So
Amazing.
3 3/4 laps, 4 second, for running on that sort of surface, and obviously different competition. Yeah. So local events, you'd kind of turn up and you obviously knew who everybody was, and you had almost like your pecking order. Yeah. So really, you might have 10 in the race, but there's only 2 or 3 who you're really racing against, because you knew who was better than you, knew who was worse than you, or not as good as you, I suppose. And you would have our kind of local. You mentioned about like Co and stuff, and that was obviously put athletics on a bit of a pedestal at that time. Yeah. It was very high profile. When those guys were racing, it was like on the front pages, not on the back pages, on the front pages of the news. But we had our local people. People like Steve Kelly. Yes. Very inspiring, and Dave Newton. They were the guys, weren't they? Who we were kind of growing up in our teens. They were in their mid to late 20s, so 10, 12 years older than me. And I guess they were, you could see how they were training. Steve Kelly was running 100-something mile a week. Again, holding down a full-time job, running around in the dark with a torch, find his way home. Yes. But also as well, they were really supportive, those guys, really took an interest in what you were doing and asking you how you were getting on. And so you're 14, 15, 16. Yeah. That's really, really inspiring and motivating to you. And, I remember speaking to Dave Newton, and he said, we're doing this run on a Monday night or something. Why don't you come along? And, and you're like, wow, I've been invited to run with these guys. Yeah. And, so you probably... As you get older, you underestimate the value of perhaps doing that to somebody else. That some other young kid of 14 or 15 would be really inspired if you said to them, why don't you come along to our training group? And, Morris is running the session. So we get... The group of Morris expanded because people could see that it was really successful. But some people thought he just waved a magic wand. Yeah. And it was like, we'll ordain you to do really well. But it wasn't like that at all. It was damn hard work.
There you go.
It was. And I remember doing a training session with Morris.
Luckily, you were a hard worker.
Thrived on it. Yeah, loved it.
Good. So what time did you... I'm curious at your 1,500 metre time, because I saw that a young lad broke it last week in...
Yeah, my best time was 3:50.
That's pretty amazing. From 3:50, because Keith Gerrard, I looked it up prior to you coming in, because Keith Gerrard did it. Did he beat your record in 2011?
He did. He ran for 3:47, something like that.
Yes, because David Malarkey just did it in 3 minutes 42.97, and that was in the UK, was it?
He's based in Leeds. Yeah,
he did that.
That's what David has done is a tremendous run. I guess that's the sort of time you like myself to look back and try to kind of run that sort of time. But those lads. Keith obviously had fantastic success cross country, maybe longer distances. Really, he was dropping down to the bottom of his range to run a 1,500 meters. Those lads are they're basically training full time.
Yes, exactly. That's my point. The fact that you were doing a full-time job. So, back to your career, because your career at that point, you were doing this training, which is what all amateur athletes were doing, because there was no funding. Professional athletics was frowned upon because that wasn't allowed to be in the Olympics, and of course, lots of things have changed since then. But I mean, fair play to you. You did this and held down a career, and then went on in your own career to do certain things. I mean, take us back through your career. So you worked at the civil service and you were in the Treasury, and then you went on to do some more. You decided you did want to do some qualifications after all, I think.
Yeah. So you kind of develop and learn about life, and they ran a training through the civil service, which was an HNC in public administration at the Isle of Man College. Yep. And
it's been a bit odd to go back there to do that. Or was it on day release?
It was day release. Yeah. It was a day release course. So the civil service supported that, and I knew a few people who had done it, and they said it was a really good course to do. So I signed up for that because again, I didn't want to work. There were options to go into internal audit and do exams in that, and I kind of looked at them. Don't really quite want to do that. I enjoyed the job, but it wasn't what I wanted to do all my life.
Okay.
And you'd be kind of pigeonholing yourself in one direction. So this course seemed like a good thing to do, and I kind of really got fired up. There were some good lecturers at the college, and they'd run the course for 3 or 4 years before that, so they'd learnt quite a lot. And I got really kind of inspired by that and thought, actually, I want to do a bit more of this, and maybe I've sort of written off a little bit. Yeah. And I shouldn't have done. And I guess that's just maturity and kind of learning a bit about yourself. So I did this course. It was 2 years. It was day release, as you say. It was one afternoon and one evening a week. Yeah. So it was a Monday, and it was always quite tricky to fit your training in on a Monday. Sometimes you get finished college at 9 o'clock at night, you'd be knackered, you'd be there since 1 o'clock. And then you go for a run at night when you go home. So
with a torch.
Well, street lights in Douglas, so it's not too bad. But just to kind of... Yeah, you might do a 5 or 6 mile run so you've done something. Okay. And that kind of fired me up, and I kind of looked around at where I might want to go with my career, and I identified this course at Nottingham Business School. I could kind of see that there was a more burgeoning private sector on the island at that time, so it was either work in a bank or work in the civil service.
Well, in 1989, the offshore financial sector had already set off, hadn't it?
And I can't say, a number of people were leaving the civil service just to go and work in the private sector. Quite a lot of people did that.
So it's a pretty big move to give your job up and go off to uni and take a 4-year course, wasn't it?
Yeah. But
so did you get a grant to go, and did parents back you?
I get a grant, got a little bit of help from the parents, and I saved up some money. Yeah. And I got a grant from the government, so I was probably in a better position than most people were. But relatively, you'd be on your annual salary. You'd be less than half of what you'd been earning. Yeah,
you could have had a mortgage and 3 kids by then.
Could have done. Unfortunately, I didn't. Yeah. So I was in a position to do it. Lots of people wouldn't have been. So set off on this 4-year course. So it seemed quite daunting at the time, but I was really up for the challenge.
And it gave you a vocational qualification as well as the BA honours degree, did it? Was it Chartered Institute of Marketing Diploma, I see?
So that was a little added on at the end of the course. I did marketing as an option in my final year. We had the opportunity to do the Chartered Institute of Marketing Diploma at the end of the course, which we were fortunate. You basically had to do one exam. Yeah. And I was staggered at the number of people who didn't take that option up. Finished. I could understand the way the 4-year course, you kind of just want to go and have a lie down at the end of it. But it was like an extra couple of weeks' work to get this extra qualification that would then stand you in good stead for other opportunities. So I signed up for that. Yeah, I just did that. Yeah. It was something that unfortunately I never quite got the opportunity to use. But all these things give you an extra view of things when you're working in other roles.
Yes, definitely.
You see things perhaps that other people have had maybe a less broad background don't see. That's not a criticism of them, but if you've just worked all your life in the civil service, you perhaps don't understand how the private sector works, and maybe you get a little bit bogged down in processes and bureaucracy and rules and so forth. So and likewise with the private sector, they perhaps wouldn't see some of the importance of those processes and procedures that you. So it's trying to get a balance between the two.
No, totally. Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that. But so you then, talking of that private sector, you came out and you got a role with Eagle Star.
Yep.
And you stayed there for 10 years.
Yep.
And then, lo and behold, what happened next?
So what happened? Yeah, I'd worked at Eagle Star, which kind of morphed into Zurich.
Yeah.
A great place to work, some great people, lots of opportunities for people, in a different way. It provided opportunities that the civil service wouldn't have got in terms of travelling and progression.
And you were a project manager there?
Project manager for 5 years, so got involved in some great projects around about the kind of Y2K in the main.
Yes.
There were sort of lots of projects going on at that time, which is how I got involved and continued for a number of years. But I kind of, again, after 10 years, I felt maybe things were running a little bit stale for me. So at that point, you're in your late 30s, I've got another 15, 20 years of this.
Had you decided you weren't going to make it as a Olympic athlete at that point, or?
Yeah, yes. So my kind of running career, in my 20s, I picked up quite a lot of injuries. And then in 1991, so this is in the middle of the course at Nottingham, I was ill for about a year with, I suppose, chronic fatigue. So I got tonsillitis, and I just couldn't get over that. And it just left me wiped out for about a year. So that was quite a difficult time. I guess I was trying to study. I couldn't run. I couldn't run. To be honest, it was just too tired. So you read a lot about in the minute about long COVID and things like that. It's probably very similar. Yeah, similar to that. Yeah. And I ended up having to undergo quite a sort of lifestyle change in terms of diet and nutrition and so on. A lot more resting and I got over that. Yeah. I got over that and then kind of restart. So by that point, I'm about 28, 29. Yeah. And I'd had a few injury niggles. So that was almost, I had to restart. And I remember that was back mid-summer 1992. And the Island Games were in 1993. Yeah. And I sort of set myself the target of the Games, which were a year away. They're about 11 months away.
That wasn't Gibraltar, was it? That was one before? No, that was
Isle of Wight.
Isle of Wight, yeah.
And I set myself the target. And right through the winter, I was really playing catch-up. And I didn't start, it was about May time. About two months before the Games, where I started feeling like I was running properly again. Yeah. And I did get to the Games, and I was fortunate there. Again, won 2 silver medals. And
you'd gone to Zurich by then as well, or it was at the end of the end of that year.
Yeah. So I was just finishing the course at Nottingham. I was doing my finals, and I remember in the middle of my finals, I went up to Blackpool and ran a race and ran quite well in that. And it was actually, you'd think, well, what are you doing that in the middle of your finals for? But it was a great way of getting bit of a break.
Yeah, chill
out a little bit. So I was good, I think, at balancing all the things that were going on. I kind of treated the course as like my job. So I'd get up at the normal times. So if you go into work, and I go and sit in the library all day, or normally the library rather than sitting at home, because it's too many distractions at home. I sit in the library, and like people you'd be sharing a house with, they'd be up at 10, 11 o'clock at night working. Yeah. It's like, well, what are you doing that for? You've wasted the whole day. So I guess you're doing all this and you become quite a good time manager, because you're trying to fit everything in and you're trying to have a bit of social life as well. So, yeah, I probably quite a bit last minute and things was something that I'm quite a good time manager, because you have to be quite organised to do all these things and do your sport and do your studying and do your trying to get a career as well. So going back in 2003, I guess my running was like late 30s by this point. So you, as you say, you kind of know that.
Yeah, it's a hobby.
In sport, absolutely. And in your sport, there's a window, isn't there? And that window had gone by that point. So doing all right at Zurich, but there was some. I don't probably want to quite do this for the next 15, 20 years. A couple of people drew my attention to a job that Isle of Man Sports Council were advertising, and it was a 2-year contract and 20 hours a week, and it was very much for them. They'd identified that they needed to do something, but they didn't know what something was. Yeah, so
it was in form of it was from the strategy, strategy document. Yes,
and the Commonwealth Games in Manchester, which I think yourself was involved in, and we need to do more to support our elite, our performance athletes.
Yeah, well, that's a game when I came across you again. I was on the Sports Council in those days, and yes, I remember there was quite a lot of excitement about, Chris has applied. I wonder, because obviously I wasn't involved in your recruitment, but No, it was clearly the right thing to do. So yeah.
So a bit of a leap of faith on my part and the parts of the Sports Council as well. To take. So I had no experience really. Only as
because only a 2-year contract, wasn't it? And you were giving up this full-time career at Zurich to come along. It was a massive leap of faith on your part.
Yeah, and I guess there's a bit of a theme here that I'm prepared, although I wouldn't perhaps regard myself as a big risk taker, because I didn't necessarily see it as a risk. I kind of weighed up the pros and the cons, and if it didn't work, you just go back and do something else. So, got involved in this job. It was a 2-year contract, and so stayed for 17 years. So I was 17 years doing that job, and pretty much we all have a few fraught moments, but I would say that 99.9% of the time was just so enjoyable and just a joy to do that job.
But looking back at your story that you've just shared, and I wasn't involved in your recruitment, it's very clear to me why you got the job, because you'd been through this role of being a very talented athlete, but not being able to have that support and knowledge to be able to make that go all the way to the top, where you clearly had the ability, but not the opportunity quite that today's athletes. And we've learned so much, haven't we? And you've just mentioned it yourself with how you got yourself better in your Nottingham Trent, your university part there. I didn't know you'd been at poorly, but listening how you got yourself better, well, that's miles ahead of where athletes would have been back then. For the most part, we would have all overtrained and made ourselves sick again and gone on and not thought about our nutrition or anything like that. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and there was an interview. I remember at the interview, which I remember really, really vividly. There was a question asked about, and it was pretty much if you were sitting in the shoes of the athletes, what would you want to do? And my answer to that was the two key things for me at that point were keep injury free and keep healthy. And if the athletes can do that, then a lot of it's down to them.
Yeah.
And I know a lot more recently the stuff coming around mental health and psychology, and towards the end of my role, we were moving into that direction. But for 10 or 12 years, my kind of philosophy is we can keep these people healthy and we can keep them injury free and treat them if they get a problem and support them while they're injured. The rest is down to them to...
You're in the right place, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
You should have good mental health.
It's down to you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Post-career, it's a struggle. And so I didn't kind of hit the heights that some of these people have hit. I was lucky I was able to find something I was able to channel my energies into that kept me involved in sport in a different way. But perhaps some people, they haven't got the education or they haven't got the family support or whatever it might be. They can go quite rapidly into quite a dark place because all of a sudden, sport is, you need to be focused. You've got your kind of season ahead, whatever sport you're doing, and all of a sudden that's kind of whipped away from you.
Yeah.
And what do I do now?
No, absolutely.
What's my purpose?
Yes, but for the benefit of our listeners, perhaps you could just describe what your role was in the latter part of your time at Isle of Man Sport and where it sits now for elite athletes. What facilities have you put in place? So you've now left it in a much better place than when you found it.
Sure. So the role was a very broad brief at the start. It was to support our elite athletes, our performance athletes, and I was given initially 4 athletes to work with back in 2004. Just for the benefit of the listeners, they were Mark Cavendish, Tim Neal, Martin Aram, and Christian Varley. So in their own way, they've all done pretty well. Some of them have had pretty hard journeys to get to where they are now. So a lot of work in terms of was I guess one-to-one, sitting down, counselling, I suppose, just to some extent. And some athletes are obviously very, very self-sufficient. Others need more support and help and guidance. And from that, we started putting in place some support structures. So we had physiotherapy, medical support, we talked about nutrition, sports psychology support. And in 2009, we had the Sports Institute, which was a purpose-built facility constructed at the NSC. So that then kind of gave us a home and some focus. So following on from that, we then looked at, this is around about 2012, 2013. We had then quite a bit of data in terms of how people progress and who does well. So you might get little Johnny or Jane comes along, age 12, and they look like they're going to be a world beater. You get to 18 or 19 and they faded away. And yet you'll get somebody else who you're 12, 13, maybe not that bothered, not that interested. But again, something fires them up so that 18, 19, 20, suddenly they're doing really, really well. And there could be all sorts of reasons why things happen. So some people have had more access to training. Some people have more encouragement. So some people maybe, physical development is a massive area. We know what it's like at school. You might be 11 and one person's up here and one person's down there. And by you get to about 21, 22, they've all caught up with one another. Mm-hmm. And so we know people at school who were really, really good at sport, but they kind of, perhaps it was too easy for them. They perhaps didn't have that resilience, that toughness. So we put in place, we were lucky we had the Kelly Holmes programme. So Kelly Holmes came over in 2012, 2014. And then we tried to lift what we thought was the best stuff from that. Mm-hmm. And we set up our Sport Aid Academy, which concentrates on 13 to 16-year-olds. And we've had about 250 people through that program over the last 5-6 years.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And you mentioned David Malarkey, so he was in the original intake, trying to, rather than, we didn't get involved in their direct coaching or anything like that, but it was trying to give them, I guess they are general life skills, aren't they, around planning.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff we've already talked about, planning, time management, resilience, overcoming setbacks. This is stuff that's going to happen. Nobody sets off in their sporting journey or life journey and it all's just plain sailing, even Usain Bolts and people like that. There'll be all sorts of stuff in the background.
No, it doesn't just happen by osmosis.
No, it doesn't. No.
Somebody has to coach you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will get the setbacks and the disappointments, and you maybe have a couple of years where you don't improve and things go a little bit wrong, and you have to overcome those things. So we've spent a lot of time putting all that in place, and hopefully over the next few years we're going to see more and more people who graduate from that academy. Clearly 250 aren't going to become great world beaters, but some of it's about opportunity, because some of it's the little Johnny who's 4'10", competing against somebody who's 5'10", and nobody notices them. But they might be a bag of determination, giving them some sort of equal opportunity to the person who's winning because they're 5'10" and everybody else is 5'2". So it's trying to, I guess, level up the playing field. There was a great story. I kind of read quite some really interesting stuff around this topic, and one of the books that I really enjoyed reading, which was about 8 or 9 years ago, was a book called The Goldmine Effect, by a chap called Rasmus Ankersen. What he'd done, he was a failed footballer. He was a Danish gentleman, and he was a footballer, and about age 21, 22 got a bad injury and had to pack up. He then decided that he wanted to get involved in coaching, and he also was very interested in the kind of what makes people good. Anyway, he tells a really great story at the start of his book. So he's in Denmark and he's played a bit of football. His career's ended, and he ends up being a kind of assistant coach at the club in some way with their academy. And their academy is recruiting players, and they've decided they're going to take 16 players in this academy. They've got 15 players, so they need to fill an extra place in the quota. And there's this lad who's there who, he wasn't a great player, but they kind of liked his attitude, so they recruited him. So he was about 15 at the time, 15, 16. So he was the 16th boy into the academy. So that must have taken place about 16, 17 years ago. So fast forward all those years, we saw this player, let's talk about Simon Kjaer. So he was on the telly the other day in the Denmark football match, captaining Denmark, saving the life of the player on the pitch, who was effectively had died on the pitch. And you kind of track back that story. Now, there was a lot said about him at the start and his personal characteristics. I'm kind of aware of the story goes back even further. The lad who just crept into the football academy at 15, becomes a professional footballer. Somebody likes the look of him. He gets a big money transfer to Italy, and he's playing most of his career in Italy. And then we wind forward to a couple of weeks ago, and he's saving the life of a player. And if someone hadn't noticed that player,
who knows?
Who knows where we might be and what might have happened. So there was obviously there was a lot of interest in that story when it occurred. But I was aware of a little bit more of the background, which was even more interesting. That he'd kind of just...
That is amazing.
Into a...
it just shows you the opportunities that you get and what you can do with them.
Yeah, you have to take advantage of opportunities, and absolutely.
So you have just stepped down from the sports aid role, and you're too young to retire, clearly. And we'll get to later in the podcast. We'll cover what you're going to do next. But if it's all right with you, I'd just like to move on with Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that story. I mean, that's great. Your story is fascinating, and there's lots of things I didn't know. We'll come on to what you're going to do next later on. If it's okay, we'll just move on to the rest of the questions that we ask.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess knowing something of your background, because I think our grands were friends, weren't they? We go back that long.
Yes, in Ramsey.
Yes. So if you don't mind me asking, and primarily I ask this when I meet people in my role as financial planner, but what was money like growing up for you?
My dad was a bank manager.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So money would be something that would be high up, I guess, on his priorities in terms of making sure that his family knew about money and saving and things like that. So, so from quite an early age, probably when I left school, I was always kind of taught the importance of money and not wasting it. I remember probably when I must have been about 17 or 18, taking out an insurance policy with Norwich Union. Mm-hmm. Which kind of matured and gave us quite a nice lump sum in my late 30s and so on. So obviously, again, I guess, you're going back to something jobs like the civil service. We mentioned they're safe jobs, aren't they?
Yeah.
So probably safety first was quite important. I identified when I was at Zurich that I wanted to retire quite young, that I didn't want to work forever. So again, they had a good pension scheme, and you could pay extra in, which was something that I took advantage of.
Yeah, good.
Which has been fortunate, I guess, further down the line. It's paid dividends further down the line. So, I'm always been quite interested in kind of reading the financial press and a bit of dabbling in stocks and shares and things like that.
Yeah.
Sort of like the 80s, where there were late 80s, where there were sell-offs, weren't there, and privatisations and gas and
Mrs.
PT and selling things off and some of these things where you got awarded free shares, and with Zurich you got awarded free shares and share option schemes and things like that. So I always took those opportunities up because they were like, you couldn't really lose on them because I think you just got your money back.
That's
the
right.
share price went down.
Yes, that's how they
back.
work. Yeah,
so,
indeed. Yeah.
And of course they were in a world of rising stock markets and things like that. So it's always been really, it is important to...
So you had a good education from your dad anyway? Yeah.
Yeah, and then a little bit of, I guess, sort of self-teaching and reading up on different things is something I've been quite interested in.
Great. It's not the norm. We generally find that...
I'm sure.
Yeah, a lot of kids don't get that, financial capability.
Should be teaching it in schools, in my view.
Yes, no, absolutely. They do. I mean, over in the Isle of Man, they do it far better than in the UK, in my opinion. With we have Junior Achievement here, which does some great kids programs these days. So we're lucky here. So
that kind of applying what I've done has put me in a position where I, fortunate. I guess all the times we talked earlier on, I was able to leave the civil service. Yeah. I was able to take the part-time job. You wouldn't have been able to do that if you're living on the breadline every month, waiting for the 25th of the month. Yeah. And that was one of the questions I was asked when I Isle of Man Sport. They want to make sure that somebody was in a position to be able to work part-time from a full-time job, earning good money. You kind of, it's less than half the salary. Yes. To do that, you're going to be able to afford it and your mortgage and things like that. So,
got to really want to do that.
It takes your motivation, doesn't it? Yeah, you're not in it for the money.
No, clearly. Oh, that's great. So, of all the things you've done throughout your life so far, Chris, what was the most fulfilling?
I think in terms of the job at Isle of Man Sport, and to do that job for 17 years and to take it from basically working in something which was a little more than a broom cupboard. You could just about squeeze two people on a desk in there. It was really small, wasn't it?
It was.
And to take that and into something whereby, you've helped hundreds of people, and to see some of the success that we've got had over the last few years in sport and the Isle of Man people on the world stage. It was always one of the things in my mind was always to be able to pick up the newspaper and read about somebody from the Isle of Man at any point. And obviously we need people in a breadth of sports to do that. It can't be just one sport. So that was always one of my aims. So I think in terms of that, it has been a great achievement. In terms of my own running, I guess looking back, some of the things that I did have set a bit of a benchmark for other people to do in terms of the commitment that I put into trainers. I mentioned people like Steve Kelly. I think they set the bar high, and hopefully I kind of in my field was able to take that a little bit further as well in terms of some of the stuff. And hopefully people like Keith and David they may or may not realise it, that they've benefited from that as well. So a single achievement is quite hard. I guess retiring at 56 wasn't too bad an achievement.
That's pretty good, that, Chris.
As well. So that in itself, it's hard to put it to one single thing and say, well, that was a great thing that I did looking back. So generally, I would say the work that I did with Isle of Man Sport from a career perspective, professional perspective, was the work with Isle of Man Sport, and from a running perspective, some of the records are set quite early on in my 20s, but then been able to sustain the running for an extended period of time and retain enthusiasm and interest, and do a little bit of coaching now. I've done coaching over the years and passing on knowledge and experience to other people so that they can not make the mistakes that you've made.
Excellent.
That's always important.
No, that is. No, thank you. In terms of your what you've done from your career, what would be your number one tip then for any aspiring young athlete who wants to progress to that level, to that world stage? Well,
it's again, find something that in working as well, find something they enjoy and enjoy doing it. Life's not a rehearsal, is it?
No.
So make sure that you are enjoying it whilst you're doing it, and appreciate it at the time, because I could have probably stayed in the civil service and had a steady career, but I don't think I would have enjoyed it anything like as much as what I've enjoyed all the stuff that I've done. So in terms of kind of business tips or sporting tips, it's find something that you enjoy doing and enjoy doing it at the time. We can't do these things on our own, so get good people around you, whether they're people that you train with, coaches, mentors, or whatever. Have people that you can turn to ask for advice, and you can sit down with a tea or a coffee and kind of share your goods and your bads with them and get some steer and so on. So always get good people around you. We're fortunate with Isle of Man Sports, as you know, Sharon, we've so many great volunteers, and I think that was probably an underestimated part of the benefit, is working with some amazing people, not just the professional people, the physios and the doctors, but the people come onto the committee. They're some real sharp people. I learned loads from them, watching them operate in meetings and things like that. You just sit back sometimes.
It's a good training ground, isn't it?
Absolutely,
How to work on a board.
Of course. So enjoy it, and if you're not enjoying it, go and find something else to do, because there's lots of things in life you can do.
Thanks for sharing that. So what do you do to relax and keep your life in balance? Well, you're going to have plenty of time for that now.
I've got plenty of time for that, so I'm still aiming to sort of keep myself fit and healthy, and I think that's probably a big part of my life is still, competitively, that's all been and gone, hasn't it? But I still like to, we live in a great place on the island, and get out and walking, cycling, running, whatever I can. So love doing that. I've got a good circle of friends as well, some close friends, like to spend time with them, and a partner at home. And hopefully we've done quite a lot of travelling over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, and aim to do some more of that as well.
I noticed on your biopic on Facebook, it's you and was it Sydney Harbour Bridge?
Sydney Harbour Bridge. Went to Sydney, went to Australia a couple of times, in Sydney, which is obviously an amazing place to go to. Don't quite know when we'll get back there at the minute. So travelling is important. Say that the Isle of Man's a lovely place, and there's worse places we could have been stuck for the last year and a bit, isn't there? But also like to broaden horizons and see other places as well.
Sure.
So travelling is, and it's something I've always enjoyed doing from quite a young age, actually. Always enjoyed going to other places, and I'm probably one of the few people that still gets excited sitting on a plane. I think now it's just a chore, isn't it, for people? But
I don't know.
I think
there's something about getting that first gin and tonic, isn't it? And the mobile phone switched off.
I think I'll get really excited the next time I get on a plane.
I think we all will.
It'll be the first time for so long, isn't it?
So what are the best things about living on the Isle of Man?
Strong sense of community. I was involved with the parish walk the other day, in a very small way. But what a fantastic event that is.
Oh, isn't it?
Bringing people just giving out drinks and stuff from the side of the road, from the house, and they must go to ShopRite or something and buy all this stuff in just to give away, to be part of the event. So we've obviously got a strong sense of community on the Isle of Man. I think we get very proud, don't we, of people who we know and we can relate to. And I think this is really, we're going back to sport a little bit now, really powerful if we can see people in our own community doing great things. It inspires.
So right, absolutely.
It inspires other people, whether it's
certainly does.
business or whether it's sport or the arts or something like that.
I mean, how many people when they're asked where they're from, where you're from? Well, from the Isle of Man. Oh, okay. Do you know where Mark Cavendish is from?
Yeah, you'll get Mark Cavendish, the TT.
Yeah.
You know, you might cats and with no tails. You know, for a little rock in the middle of the Irish Sea with 80,000 people, it's amazing the number of people who know about it wherever you go. So we have this, you know, we can identify, can't we, with people we know who've maybe been to school or been to our school, or you've seen them in the pub or whatever, doing great, and they're doing great things.
Yes.
So I think that's a real strong benefit of being on the island, and that's why
Conor Cummins and his veranda accident, and now look at him doing his business.
We spent quite a lot of time with Conor a few years ago, and you know he kind of stood out a little bit.
Lovely lad, isn't he?
Yeah, a real gent, actually, Conor. And he was very much focused on, I want to do well on my motorbikes, but I won't be doing that forever. And I know I need to do stuff further down the line. I remember we had a chat with him a few years ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
And what a nice lad he is, and you know, he's running his own little business empire now. So that's really, really great to see. And it's a great place to live. Obviously, we've got fantastic scenery, but you know, there's isolation, I think, which is probably a struggle for some people, particularly people who come from the UK. Sometimes it can be difficult to be away from their families and so on in the UK.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So what would you say the main challenges are living here?
Living on the island? Well, I guess the one I've mentioned is isolation, isn't it, for people? You know, that we you know, it's not, you can't just drive half an hour down the road.
Well, you can. But you'll only get to Colby or something.
You only get to Colby, or Peel. Whereas people have access to a lot more, you know, I guess, you know, theatres, cinemas, multiplex cinemas, social life for people, sporting opportunities, are a lot less on the island, aren't they? But we have to turn these things to our advantage rather than dwelling on the bad things. This is another interesting thing going back to sport. They did a survey in UK sport. So they looked at successful people. And this wasn't just people who had done well. These were the exceptional people.
Yeah.
The multiple Olympic medalists, the multiple world champions, the people who are winning Sports Personality of the Year. And they looked for common themes and common threads in their lives to see if they could identify what those were, because that will then help you. If you know why the best people are the best, you can then start putting stuff in place for the next generation. So they looked at some common themes, and they identified these people typically came from a area or a town with a population between 50 and 100,000. They identified that they were generally quite affluent places, that the families were generally quite affluent, that they had opportunities to access a range of sporting facilities and coaching. They identified that the parents had short commute times to work. They identified that there were strong local role models. They identified that sport was important in the community. What we're describing here.
Yeah, I think I'm getting your picture. Yeah.
So we're describing the Isle of Man as a great place to do sport, and I guess that could translate into other areas of life as well. So we could look at all the disadvantages of living on the Isle of Man, couldn't we? And we're isolated, and it costs money. You have to go on the boat or the plane to travel. But we can turn some of those things into advantages as well, that actually being from the Isle of Man should be an advantage rather than a disadvantage. You know, if you're some young young person growing up on a council estate in Manchester, where, you know, your parents don't have the resources, you're one of so many hundreds of people who are aspiring to do these things. So although it might be great and you live in Manchester and it's not far to go to Liverpool to compete, well, if your parents haven't got any money or your parents haven't got any interest,
and they have to commute to London,
they have to commute to London to work or whatever, and you know, so we have to look at the good things of living on the island, which are around community spirit, and you know, we're fortunate, it's a reasonably affluent place. Let's be honest about that. We don't have the deprivation that you'd have in the UK. So, you know, it is a great place to live and to work, and we'll overcome the setbacks, get on and off island. And I know, you know, we talked before about people who've gone off island to train, and absolutely don't blame them. course, it's easy to train in a group of 15, 20 like-minded people and kind of on your own or with a couple of mates as well. But so the disadvantage of living on the island, I guess, are isolation.
Yeah.
But let's not dwell on those too much, and let's be positive.
Yeah, no,
the opportunities. That
absolutely, you've described those so well. Absolutely. So, what have you got planned next, Chris? What's
Well, my original idea was to do a bit of travelling, but hey, that's been put a little bit on hold at the minute.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, played a small role in the parish walk. I've been involved heavily with the Easter Festival running over the last 15 odd years. That's been cancelled the last 2 years, which we've got a lot of work to try and build that up.
Yeah.
I got asked to do a little bit of coaching a while ago, which I'm involved with, helping a young athlete at the minute. And I guess I'm just looking. I want to I've been really, really lucky and really privileged to be involved with sport and getting paid for it for the last 17 years. So it's nice to do stuff on a voluntary basis, because without volunteers, sport's nothing, is it? It's nowhere. So it's a bit of an opportunity to
do more
volunteering work and have a bit more time to do that.
Yeah, no,
because,
that's great. But never say never to the right opportunity if it comes along.
We never say never. That's what somebody's going to offer you, doesn't it? But I haven't got. And I'm not sitting here thinking, well, I want to do X next or Y next.
It's going to have to be good, isn't it?
Somebody did sort of say to me, if you're interested in, I won't say what area it was, give us a shout. But I said, oh, thanks, but actually, can take a bit of time out for a while.
Quite right too. No, that's great. Well, you've already mentioned one book that you read, The Goldmine Effect, but are there any other books that you would want to recommend to our listeners as a decent source?
Yeah. So The Goldmine Effect was an interesting one. And around about 2012, 2014, I got introduced to a number of books. One was The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, where he talked a lot about how we obviously it's a big debate about nature and nurture, isn't there? And he was very much, I guess, in the, we can nurture talent a lot and put lots of things in place. So Daniel Coyle, it's a little while since I've read that one. That was a real good read. And Bounce by Matthew Syed. A number of people will be aware Matthew Syed writes for The Times. Was an international table tennis player.
Yeah, he was.
And we were fortunate to bring Matthew to the island about 2013.
Gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we got sponsorship from one of the e-gaming companies, and he did some work with them, and we put on an event at the Manx Museum, November 2013.
Yeah. What was he like?
Oh yeah, he's operating on a different level. We remember we went we went to we had a bit of lunch. He did this. So one of the e-gaming companies.
You can do
microgaming.
Yeah.
We did a partnership with them.
Play it forward, isn't it? They do this.
Yeah. So Matthew spent some time. Read this book, Bounce. I think was Sports Book of the Year about 2000.
Yeah, and I'm reading it at the moment. Funny enough,
and
it's really good.
It's some fantastic stuff in it. We were kind of having the conversation at work, which was, this stuff is really great, but people won't listen to it if I say it or whatever. We need to get it from the horse's mouth. So we got in contact with him and said, would he be interested in coming over to the Isle of Man to give a talk, and how much that would cost? So we came back and said, I'd love to come, and this is the fee, etc., etc. So
sharply take a breath.
yeah. Well, they're not cheap, these people, but they're top of their profession. And so we partnered up with microgaming, and he did a stint at microgaming and did a stint with the at the museum in the evening. And we were in the middle of all this. We met him for some lunch. I say they operate on a different level, these people. His kind of intellect was just obvious, just from the way he talked. And I remember having this, he was doing some work with Arsenal at the time, and we were having this lunch for about an hour, and then he kind of in about 3 sentences summarised the whole conversation. It was like, wow, where did that come from? But he wrote this book, Bounce, which again looks at the kind of the development of talent, and why did David Beckham become a great footballer over maybe others who were, as a young players, were similar to him, and what made him exceptional, and what made Serena Williams or somebody, why would she be top of the game for 20 odd years? And he looked at all that sort of stuff, a lot of stuff around deliberate practice, and rather than just kind of going through the motions practice. But it's a fabulous read, and he's done some other books subsequent to that.
Yeah, I've read them. Black Box Thinking.
Yeah.
Rebel Ideas.
Yeah,
Rebel Ideas is very good.
Haven't done a Black Box Thinking. I've got about halfway through that, and it was nothing like the inspiring read that Bounce was.
Yeah,
Maybe
I read
it was
Black
just
Box first. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
And Bounce is like one of those novels that you pick up and you just keep reading it and keep reading it because it's so interesting.
So it's great stories about all sorts of people that you've heard of. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can relate to it.
Yeah.
Remember that person. So that he's a great read as well. So I liked his style of writing. There's some other books actually around. Talent is Overrated is another one by Jeffrey Colvin, which isn't on the list that I gave you. Which actually, if you read Bounce and then you read Talent is Overrated, there's a lot of similarities between the two books. And I think what Matthew Syed was very good at doing was gathering research that other people had done.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
And then distilling it into a very easy to read format. It's not an academic book.
No, well, who reads academic research other than people like him? But, and then summarises it in 3 sentences.
Summarises it and makes a shed load of money. So good luck to him. So obviously they're kind of sporting books. I guess they're using sport, aren't they, as the kind of vehicle? Because you could use apply the theories and the processes that he's talking about to whether you want to become a doctor. And they talk about other stuff, don't they? They talk about, I think it's in Bounce, one of the books, where the building that's on fire. Is that one of them?
I haven't got through that far yet.
The buildings, maybe it's in the Talent Code. I think it's in the Talent Code where there's a building on fire. It's in America. The person who's in charge of the fire crew says, "Right, guys, we've got to evacuate," and he evacuates the building. And about 10 seconds later, the building collapses. And the moral of the story was he just had intuition because he'd been a firefighter for 25 years. He knew that actually they couldn't identify the source of the fire and it was underneath the building, so that caused the thing to collapse. And they talk about, so it's almost learning, so you get intuition. So how can a nurse in a maternity unit identify there's something wrong with the baby and go,
intuition.
Intuition. The doctors, they're doing some tests, there's nothing wrong, but there's some intuition. That you learn that over a period of time.
Yes.
And I guess you're great.
It's relevant learning. Yeah.
Your great sports coaches will you kind of call it gut feel or whatever about what's right and who's the prospects out in front.
Yes, but you trust someone's gut feel over somebody else's. I get that. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's great. Thank you, Chris. I mean, fascinating. We can go on about this all day, obviously.
I know. Yeah.
So I mean, looking forward to what you end up doing next and hearing all about that. But other than that, it's just to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I know that our listeners can find out about you on Facebook. There's no other social media presence planned at the moment, so Facebook is where you're at. And good luck for the future.
I'm not big into self-promotion or anything like that. I'll just do my job to the best as I can. Really.
Quite right. Yeah, that's lovely. Thanks very much, Chris. Thank
Pleasure,
you.
Sharon. Thanks for inviting me in.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Island Influencers from Thornton Chartered Financial Planners. To find out more and for useful links, visit thorntonfs.com/podcasts.